we're going to get started with some of my slides. I'm so excited to be here to be talking about reinventing learning, because I know that that is a conversation that is going on very heavily right now in the times that we're in. Everyone is uh, exploring how do we actually get onto a new trajectory as it relates to how we learn, especially given the conditions that we are facing today in the world. And we've seen the landscape of learning change so rapidly. And so, welcome. I just want to say welcome to all of you who are watching, who are listening from all over the world. And as we move forward to the next slide, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the work that I am. So, uh, yes, the slides right now are a little bit jumbled, but we're just going to keep going. Next slide, please. Okay. So we talk about learning. For me, it really is kind of like a dual path. It's really about being a student as well as a teacher. And I'm going to be sharing with you a couple of different trends as well as transformative frameworks that are going to support you in the process of really rethinking and potentially revolutionizing the way that you approach learning. So my journey as a learner and as an educator is that, I've taught at Columbia University for about 5 years as a member of its faculty. And at the same time, now recently, I decided to go back into the university system and enter into that journey of getting my own PhD in entrepreneurship and management. And so I really come at it from both perspectives, being an educator as well as being a learner. And I just think that that's important to note, because a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about is really about that spirit of each one teach one, really that spirit of you acknowledging your own expertise, as well as offering that expertise on behalf of others so that they also can grow and evolve. Next slide, please. And so I want to open up my remarks today with a quote from Barbara Marx Hubbard that I think is really relevant, that comes from the Conscious Evolution, Awakening the Power of Our Social Potential. And in it, in the education part of the Wheel of Co-Creation, Barbara writes that we are at the dawn of a new evolutionary educational system. Instead of breaking subjects into separate, unrelated disciplines, evolutionary education takes the holistic overview perspective, sees the process of creation as an unfolding pattern from the origin of creation to the present, and then places each of us in the story as its co-creators as we seek out our vocations, our places within the wheel of co-creation. And so what this really speaks to is that every single one of us who are engaging in this process of learning is part of a co-creative process. And what we gain as well as what we give goes back into that cycle of creation, into that wheel of co-creation as we move the world forward. And so next slide. What I really want to underscore is that how we approach learning today is inextricably linked to global progress. And it will ultimately determine the type of future we create. And so this conversation of learning is so, so, so important. And it's one that's going to impact the way in which we actually collectively move towards the future that we know is possible, and determine whether or not we're going to be doing it in a way where we're really harnessing the power of our full potential, or if we're going to be moving forward in a way that is really rooted in some of the, I would say, lower energies that don't really expand possibility. And so what we're talking about here, next slide, when we talk about learning is we're talking about the acquisition of knowledge, skills through experience and study, or by being taught. So even this definition, which comes from Oxford, is really speaking to that it is about the acquisition of knowledge or skills, right? And today we're talking more and more and more in the learning space about skills and skills building. But this acquisition happens as a result of experience, right? And study, or by being taught by someone. So there are all these different ways in which we can acquire knowledge. Next slide, please. And what we're finding in the learning space, that there are 5 key trends that are impacting the way in which we think about learning, how learning itself is transforming. The first one, and this comes from Will Richardson, who's an amazing educational kind of writer, theorist, an educator who really speaks about the way in which this space is transforming. And he says that the future of learning and where we're headed is going to be marked by 5 key transformations. One is that content is everywhere. So whereas before you had to go to certain places in order to access the knowledge, now it is everywhere. There is an overabundance of content, overabundance of information. 2 is that teachers are everywhere. Before, we would think that a teacher looked a certain kind of way, operated a certain kind of way, and that our relationship with the teacher had to be a certain kind of way. But now teachers are everywhere. You're a teacher. I'm a teacher. Everyone is a teacher because everyone possesses wisdom and information that can support someone else in moving forward. Third factor that's impacting the transformation of learning is that learning in the future will be marked by individualized and personalized processes, right? So what does that mean? It's that before, when we would think of everything being very standardized, but now it's really about that individual learning plan, right? It's really about the way in which you, whether you're an adult learner or you're talking about someone who is much, much, much younger, it's taking into account the individual and the personalized approach and the needs of that individual and what are they trying to do. Fourth is that learning is being transformed in the way that it operates, in the fact that it works now as networks, right? And networks are the new classrooms. So it is not just about going to one location, the classroom, you go there every week at a certain time or twice a week, and then you get the download, you get the information. No, now what's happening is, the learning process is so networked. If you think about it, even what's happening right now with the Building the New World Conference, that itself is a network. And that is the way in which those who are seeking to get this kind of information are coming together in order to absorb that knowledge, that wisdom, and then, of course, be of service to the building of a new world. So that's the networked approach to learning that we're seeing more and more. And the fifth transformation is that learning is going to become available everywhere. And we're already seeing that, right? It doesn't have to be, now, especially with this whole, the pandemic experience, we see that, yes, we went completely online for the most part, but we're online in the park, we're online at home, we're online in different ways, depending on what your resources are. However, what it's speaking to is that it is not confined to one way and one approach. It truly is available in many different modalities. And so this radically transforms the way in which we approach the acquisition of information, the acquisition of wisdom, and the creation of it. Next slide, please. And so when we think about learning this and what's really happening, we can actually look at it as something, a framework that I really love, which is the modes of learning, which comes from Harvard University's what they call Leaders of Learning program. And in this program, what you see is this kind of framework that really speaks about what's known as hierarchical. And basically one dimension is about the hierarchical versus distributed ways of approaching learning. The other is about individual versus collective. And what's important is that every single one of us as learners have a sense of how we like to learn and what works best for us. You may find that you are more of a distributed individual learner, where you want to just get all the information and you want to have it applicable to what your aims and your goals are. Or maybe you're more more someone who likes to be in a collective environment, right? Are you hierarchical and individual? You like it coming from an expert or from a teacher, and then it's just you and the teacher? Or is it about you learning in a cohort model? All of this makes a difference when it comes to learning, and all of it is being transformed. And what is amazing right now is that the more that we get information and understand how we like to learn best, we can now begin to engage. Different approaches of how we cultivate our own learning experiences, as well as how we create learning experiences. And so I highly recommend this particular model, because what it's done for me is I've started to develop my own learning experiences, or I would say redefine and reinvent my learning experiences, is that I began to say, wait a minute, if I'm being too hierarchical, how can I be more distributed? If I'm operating only from a collective perspective? How can I make sure that there's an individual benefit that each individual learner is gaining from it? So you start to see the way in which your approach to learning, our approach to learning, begins to become more holographic, more multidimensional, and more interesting, and of course, more dynamic. Next slide, please. And so what this is really speaking about is a rapid transformation or a massive transformation in active choice. That learning itself is going to be even more of an active choice in the world today about what do I decide to learn, where do I decide to learn it, and how do we want to learn? And all of that is fair game in this new exciting world of learning. Next slide. And again, fundamentally, this is all about purpose. What is the purpose? What is the aim? What is the goal that you desire to engage in order to move yourself forward on your learning journey? In fact, what kind of learning journey do you desire to take? It is all about coming back to that fundamental understanding of the deeper purpose, your deeper why. Why is it that you desire to learn? Why is it that I desire to learn? What is it that we are trying to learn in this process? Next slide. And for me, one of the most powerful dynamic frameworks that I love when it comes to the idea of learning or of moving forward towards a particular purpose or goal, it's developed by an amazing strategic scholar called Hardin Tibbs. And it's really called, this framework is called The Future as a Strategic Landscape. And what it speaks to me, is really about the learning journey. He doesn't explicitly say it, but for me, it's always about the journey of transformation. And so here I am as my local self, and with what it is that I desire to learn. And that star can be the guiding purpose of where I want to go. Maybe I want to learn and become a certified coach. Maybe I actually want to get a degree as a, and become get a PhD. Maybe it's I want to learn how to be more productive. There are so many different ways in which we can set our aims in front of us and say, this is what I want to learn. This is my North Star. And then as we begin to maneuver, we see that there is this chessboard. There are these moves we have to make. There are these ways in which we have to move along a journey to collect the intelligence, to acquire the knowledge, the experiences that then allow us to move towards our given destination. Next slide. And so what we're really speaking about here is the self, right? The values and attributes of who you are as this strategic player, right? And we say a strategic player because you're going to have to make certain moves on your learning journey, certain strategic moves in terms of where do you go to get that wisdom? How do you approach your mentors, right? If you seek to get mentors, what about your other cohort and your collaborators? All of that is a strategic choice. And then there's the chessboard, right? The issues and the challenges that every single learner must face. And sometimes those are internally created, and sometimes those are externally present. And so how do we navigate the internal challenges as well as the external challenges? And then there's the mountain, right? What is it that we seek to achieve in the process of our learning? And then there's that North Star, like I said, our enduring and guiding social role. And so because I really do believe that we are in the process of an exponential approach to transformation, next slide, we go into what does that mean in the world of exponentials? What does that mean in the world of transformative approaches and transformative engagement? And on the other side, when we look at it, how do we translate it? We see that North Star is our massive transformative purpose, right? That massive transformative purpose of how the learning journey you're on or how that desired approach is going to transform you, and what is that purpose that's guiding the process. And then we have what's known as the moonshot, right? That's the purpose-driven, bold, audacious goal. And maybe it's something like, I want to be a transformational thought leader that is going to revolutionize the way in which we approach the environment in the next decade. And so if that is what you're up to, the way in which you gain intelligence, the way in which you go to certain events, whether it's, you going to certain protests, or you going to certain rallies, or you going to certain gatherings, or you meeting with certain other thought leaders, you forming your own collaborative experience so that you can gain intelligence and wisdom from your peers, all of that is part of your learning journey. And this all takes place in what is called the field of action. And every single learning journey today is a field of action because it's no longer about sitting passively. It is about you getting in the game, you really being engaged in the way in which this information, this intelligence, this wisdom is working upon you and how you are working with it. And then there is who you are as the agent of transformation. And this is not, again, just about the individual, it's also about the collective. And then when we think about it, it's not just about me and my cohort, it's about the way in which when through our learning journeys, we begin to engage and maybe co-create businesses, or we engage businesses, we engage communities, villages, towns, countries, the world. And so you see how from having that massive transformative purpose, having that moonshot thinking, and also being willing to engage, we then realize that we are agents of transformation that can actually co-create new realities into the future. Next slide, please. And so Yuval Harari, famous historian, writes about a great deal, but one of the things that I really appreciate that he wrote about not too long ago was about the art of reinvention and the fact that reinvention is going to be the most important skill of the century. Next slide. And so what that really means is that we're not just going to have to reinvent once, as we've seen. We're going to have to get used to reinvention cycles that move very quickly. If you even think about the way in which this pandemic has unfolded, it has been one reinvention after another, after another, after another. And that's been happening not only from like a a country perspective, or even what's happening in your home, but from the nature of learning. We've had to continue. When you think about what's even happened in terms of the educational system across many different countries, in terms of those who decided to open up schools, those who decided to say, wait, we're just going to go completely online. And I have a slide that's going to be coming up that really speaks to that. But we are having to get very used to this notion of reinvention being a process, a cycle after a cycle after a cycle, which is speaking about a learning approach that is more iterative, being able to see what works and rapidly innovate. Next slide, please. And what are we shifting as it relates to this learning process, this iterative process? We're shifting and transforming the way in which we think. We're anticipating change. We're also engaging change in different ways, and we're implementing change. And we're doing it in a way that shifts the culture as well as the systems. So as this whole process has been going on, especially as it relates to the future, as well as the present reality of the learning space, we are seeing that the mindset around learning is changing, how what we're anticipating about learning is changing, how we're designing the learning environments online is starting to rapidly change. The inclusion of more virtual reality, immersive technologies, all of this is starting to impact the way in which we learn. And of course, it is about implementing the shifts that we see. And as we do, culture and systems are also transforming. Next slide, please. And so reinvention is a process, and that process invites us to engage our individual and collective exponential potential. Next slide. And so when we think about exponentials, when we think about shifts, human beings, we think of it from a linear perspective. But what is needed and what we've seen most recently in the learning space, and the 5 key shifts that I spoke to you about earlier, are speaking about the fact that we are on this rapid exponential curve. Right? We're just at the beginning of it. And we can continue down this linear path, but we know that that is not where we are headed. Next slide. Because if you look at this, we see that here we are as learners with our potential of what it is that we seek to learn. And then there is a process whereby which we engage exponential transformation by fully engaging ourselves in the learning process. And as a result of that, we then become agents of transformation. And this is the model that I've been working with around exponential potential, exponential transformation, exponential possibilities is what gets created. And very much at the center of it is that model, the modes of learning that I shared with you, the ways in which we choose to either create and co-create in the learning space, either individual experiences as well as collective experiences, experiences that are distributed where information is very pervasive and we can access it from our own volition and from our own desires and aims, as well as hierarchical, right? Going to experts, being able to have an approach where maybe wisdom is centralized into one individual or key individuals, but then it's also then the opportunity for it to also be distributed. And so to me, I think what's really exciting in the learning space is the way in which we move across the board, the way in which we co-create learning experiences that leverage the entire domain of what's possible. Next slide, please. And so we see it. This itself is kind of speaking to an exponential rise, right? When we look at the way that in, early March and what happened by early April, within about a month, we were able to go completely online when we had to. And that really speaks to the way in which, when we think about higher education, when we think about all education, and when we think about shifts in general, that we can go from thinking about things very incrementally to implementing rapid exponential change. And so I included this slide just to show you how quickly we were able to make a shift. And so when it comes to this learning space, that is what's happening. That is the backdrop against what we're seeing and what we're experiencing. And many people say that what's happened is that we've accelerated by 10 years. So this pandemic has created an acceleration of 10 years into the future, which to me is just mind-boggling. Next slide, please. And so I always say when I talk about this, that we're seeing these exponential shifts, is that we have entered into what I call the exponential potential movement. And it is not about, this exponential potential movement superseding the human potential movement or the social potential movement. It is about saying, from the human potential movement and the social potential movement, how we actually implement the changes that are needed in our world, not just in learning, has to transform. Because incremental approaches may not be sufficient, and most likely are not sufficient for the type of challenges that we are facing, not only in the learning domain, but all over our world. We really have to believe that change can be implemented at an exponential curve, and that we together can come together and work like a wave that makes transformation possible. Next slide. And so the question is, what kind of world are we truly building when we think about building the new world in the domain of education and beyond? Next slide. Some people look at the future and say, oh my gosh, we're basically, bound for dystopia, right? I won't go into politics, but there's many people that are questioning, what does the future hold? Is it dystopia? Next slide. Is it a utopia? Is that what we're trying to build? A world where everything is perfect and there are no worries, and there are no challenges. And, some people want the utopia. Some people believe that there's something beyond utopia. Next slide. And that world that is beyond utopia is what Calvin Kelly would call protopia. The idea that we may not exactly know where we're going, but we've set a course and we're doing the best we can, action by action, movement by movement, and we're engaging the process of transformation. We're engaging the process of doing right by the future, doing our best by the future. And that to me is a really interesting proposition. Next slide. And so what I offer as we talk about the future and as we talk about the idea of reinventing learning and the art and practice of transformative engagement, I offer 4 key shifts that I think that I not just think, I believe, and that I've been working on with some of my colleagues to be the way in which we are moving forward and charting the course against the backdrop of some of these great, great, great changes. Next slide. So this is all also informed by the fact that I mentioned skills before, but the constant upskilling and what's known as digital dexterity will outweigh tenure and experience. And this comes from Gartner, that by 2028, the most high value work will be cognitive in nature. And employees will have to apply creativity, critical thinking, and constant digital upskilling to solve complex problems. And whether you're an employee or you're an entrepreneur like myself, these skills of creativity, critical thinking, constant upskilling, solving complex problems, they aren't going away. And so how do we address that? We address that in these 4 ways. Next slide. We engage the left and the right brain, right? The full neural approach to learning. as well as we make sure that there are a couple of key shifts that we make. And this is all around a central big idea. And that big idea is nothing more than, what is the purpose of the learning experience? What is your goal? What is your aim? What is your dream that sits at the center of your learning journey? And when you're clear on that, then the shifts themselves become even more, I would say, they become more aligned because you're aligning yourself to that greater purpose. Next slide. And so the first shift is a shift in mindset. Next slide. As we know from the world of the work of amazing Carol Dweck, is that there is the fixed mindset and there is a growth mindset. And the fixed mindset creates a certain approach to progress and a certain approach to learning, and the growth mindset creates a different approach to learning. And when we have that growth mindset, it really facilitates our ability to not be hung up about getting everything right, right? We really engage the willingness to believe that we can grow, right? And that our intelligence, our personality, our character, it's not fixed. And that we can constantly develop, that we can continuously grow. And what's amazing about adopting the growth mindset as it relates to learning is that we confront our uncertainties in different ways. We embrace challenges. We're not afraid to fail. And we put lots of effort to learn. We don't say, oh, if I have to put effort, it's not worth it. We engage, right? That transformative engagement comes from embracing a growth mindset. Next slide. The next shift is in the realm of motivation. Next slide. We move from, in this learning experience, when we talk about how do we cultivate the transformative engagement, right, as it relates to learning and development, is that we move from being solely driven by external factors and external motivation, and we really begin to move towards intrinsic motivation. Again, tied to that purpose. What is my purpose from within for learning? How do I develop mastery and autonomy in terms of really not having to be told? And also, how do you develop that and cultivate that? If you're the teacher, right? If you're the subject matter expert, if you're the one who's responsible for delivering a learning experience, how do you cultivate autonomy, mastery, and also align with the greater purpose that your learners have? Next slide. The third shift is in the model. So if you go to the next slide. One of the models that I've been using in many of my learning experiences is something that we call, in the world of World Dream Day, the dream runner. And this is an individual who has taken their vision, their goal, their dream out of their mind, and they're moving powerfully forward with it. And the sparks that you see in that image are sparks of possibility that are serving as seeds of possibility that are getting implanted into communities, into other families, into other individuals. And so what's happening is what you see is a model of learning that says, as I learn, I then bring it into the world and do something with it. And as I do, and as I move, and as I mobilize and implement, the sparks of inspiration and the spoils of my contribution are seeding new opportunities for our world. And so to me, when we have a different model that's informing how we learn, we see different results. And let's just do 2 clicks forward. So not this slide, that's the next slide. And so that's what informed one of the recent learning experiences we had with what was known as a Dream Runner Academy, which was about how do we create learning experiences around learners' goals and dreams in a way where they're also giving back to their communities. And so that created things like Peace Through Sports that happened when the Olympics were in Brazil, and other people creating African youth excellence programs to empower African youth in Boston. And some were creating experiences that were basically around different communities in Colombia. So the idea is, when we have a different model at the core of the learning experience, and we design learning experiences that support that model, then we engender different results. Next slide. And the last shift is really speaking about how our methods have to shift. Next slide. And so one of my favorite actual methods comes from something called brain-centric design. I don't know if you guys can see that book, but it's a book that speaks to the neuroscience behind learning with deep understanding. And so I myself am certified as a brain-centric instructional designer. And what we learn in brain-centric design is a different method whereby which we can support transformative engagement. Next slide, please. And it's known as this thing called the challenge wheel. And it's really about facilitating a learning experience that is not about being the sage on the stage, but truly cultivating an experience where the learner is able to come into touch with their initial thoughts about a subject matter. Then they learn from multiple perspectives. So it's not just about you speaking, but you curating and cultivating different wisdom so that your learner gets, or your learners get, a different experience in the learning space. It's also about the opportunity to reflect. And very often we don't provide that experience when we're creating a learning experience, the opportunity to allow our learners to really reflect, get a sense of what this information that they're engaging with, what does it mean for them? And then the opportunity then in the learning space to revise their thinking, right? Once they get a sense of what is it that they're really thinking about this, they hear from others. And so this idea of cultivating that dynamic collective experience is what comes in there. And then from there, being able to share what they've learned, being able to articulate what they've learned in that session. And so this idea of creating learning experiences, right? A method of using it, a method of instruction that is based off of a challenge wheel brings that circular approach to learning where we're all coming together and we're journeying through a dynamic process. And each new information, each new experience opens up a new wheel of co-creation. And so if you have never experienced what it's like to learn in this kind of wheel format, it is truly a transformative experience. Next slide, please. And so what I want to do before we close is just offer for you individually, because I know I've spoken about a number of different things and giving you different frameworks to be able to explore as it relates to how do you reinvent your own personal learning approach, as well as how you may be reinventing your approach for those who are responsible for teaching. But what I want to speak about now is just about a personal transformative engagement framework that is built off of what I just shared with you. Next slide. And it's really about asking yourself these 4 questions, or rather 5 questions, as you explore how can you reinvent and create more transformative engagement for yourself. Because I truly believe that if we can transform the way in which we learn, then it becomes easier for us to be able to do that on behalf of others. So at the center of it, again, is the massive transformative purpose, right? So asking yourself, what is my massively transformative purpose for learning? What is it that I truly, truly, truly seek to learn as I embark on this learning journey? And then the mindset, right? How can I shift my mindset from fixed to a growth mindset while learning? So this is what you're asking yourself as you're learning, and as you're seeing maybe that there may be elements of a fixed mindset or where you feel rigid around this learning process, always inviting yourself to adopt that growth mindset. Always checking in on your motivations. How can I shift my learning aims from primarily being about what am I going to get or how good am I going to look to what do I really desire, right? What's my intrinsic motivation to learn? And then the models. How can I shift, right, from a status quo driven learning approach to more of an active choice driven learning approach? And status quo is really about, like, that rote, right? Just memorizing or just trying to get the routine down. And the question is it really about just getting the routine approach to learning and not really being able to be what's known as an adaptive expert? Because that's really what's needed now, is adaptive expertise. And so how can I learn in a way whereby which I'm constantly innovating, whereby which I'm taking the information and I'm finding exciting ways to shift it, to apply it in different ways? And finally, methods. How can I develop my adaptive expertise and self-leadership while I learn? And so you see that the models and the methods are very much linked. And it is all about being able to be a leader for yourself so that then you can lead others. Next slide. And so the art and practice of transformative engagement when it comes to learning is about these 4 key elements, right? The mindset, the motivation, the model, and the method that you're using, first and foremost with yourself on your own learning journey. And then as we move forward, we begin to apply that to help reinvent learning experiences across the board. Next slide, please. And so learning, as we know, opens up new doors. And next slide. My hope is that each of us go forth and dream up new ways to reinvent learning, first and foremost for ourselves and then for others. And I believe that's the last slide that I have here. And so I just want to thank each and every single one of you for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you. Please don't hesitate to be in touch regarding how you're transforming your approach to learning and how that's impacting how you impact and help others expand their learning experiences as well.